Good morning, my name is Adria Smith and I want to thank you for being here today. Today I'm here to convince you why private schools are better than public schools. I will give you a little background on both schools and then I'll compare the two. First, I would like to start with public schools. Public schools are funded by your tax dollars. They're also funded by government grant and they are governed by a board of directors. Public schools, everybody's entitled to a free education. So public schools cannot deny anybody to come into their schools. They're zoned. Everybody has a zone. They're zoned to a school, and that's the school that you need to go to. They're also governed by state mandated testing. Also, 1.2 million students drop out of public schools every year. Now to go to a private school. Private schools are paid for by tuition, endowments, grants, whatever. They're nonprofit schools, so they can access government funding but grants. It's not just automatically awarded to them. Private schools can deny anybody that they want, and they are not governed by state mandated testing. And because private schools are not as tightly governed as public schools, the ratio as far as dropouts are not recorded, but statistically, just by different researches that have done, the dropout rate is a lot less. In private schools, the student-to-teacher ratio is a lot smaller than public schools. I don't know if any of you walked into a public school, but in a public school, the teachers, you've got one teacher and the rooms are overcrowded. You usually have students along the wall sitting in chairs because they are so overcrowded. To our private schools, usually there's a teacher and a teacher aide with less than 20 students. I know from experience, I've walked into a public school and there's been 30 students to one teacher, which just is ridiculous, but that's the way it goes. And as I stated, private schools are not governed by a state mandated test. Right now we have the tax test, which they're looking to get rid of. But in a public school, you have to pass that test in order to graduate. So you go to school for 13 years, kindergarten through 12th grade, and you don't pass that test, you do not graduate with your class, you do not walk with your class, you do not have a high school diploma. There's a lot of students who end up going to get their GED because they can't pass this test. And the statistic on that is a lot greater than I even thought. Private school, they have their testing over their curriculum, and as long as they pass that test, they're fine. In a public school, teachers are teaching to that tax test. All the material on that tax test, that's what they teach all year long. So it's like they're more focused on that, just to teach that, versus everything outside the tax test, which public schools or private schools do. They're able to touch on those. And like I said, because of the student-teacher ratio, they can spend more time on it, and they have the teacher's aide. And you have children who, in public schools, you have children who fall through the cracks because if they don't grasp the information, there's too many students for the teacher to stop to help that one student. So they end up getting left behind, not grasping the information, to where in a private school, you have a teacher's aide who can take those one or two students off to the side and teach them to make sure they understand the information before moving on. So anyway, also private schools are called independent schools. Pretty much anybody can, there's a lot of homeschools. Homeschools are considered private schools. There's a lot of those going on just because of public schools becoming overcrowded. I don't know if most of y'all heard, up north, near Rhode Island, I believe it was, there's like 28 teachers that they laid off. And budget cuts. The budget cuts are killing our public school system right now. And because of the budget cuts, it's like they're getting rid of these classrooms, but all of these students, you don't get rid of the students, you still have the students. So they're taking all of these students in these classrooms and having to cram them in other classrooms, which again causes, the more overcrowding than what we have right now. So it's our public school system is really going downhill, and it's going downhill fast, especially the more budget cuts we have to our private schools. In the private schools, your tuition pays for it, and if you can afford to send your children, it's the best thing you can do for your children because it's just a greater education that they get. So you're wondering, you know, you have public schools which are free, private schools you got to pay for. Why pay? The reason why you pay is because of the greater education. Like I said, statistically, when you look at your kids that go to private schools and your kids that go to the public schools, if you take their grades and their grade point average and their SATs, because everybody has to take a test to get into college, and even though the kids from the private schools, they're going to private school, they end up going to universities just like kids from a public school. When you take those grades, the private school kids outweigh the public school kids by far. So so it's just a much better education for your children than a public school. And until our government gets their stuff together and can offer a better education for our children, I would say it would be the route to go. I'd like to open the floor now for any questions.
About how much is tuition for a private school?
Tuition for a private school here locally ranges around $500 to $600 a month for one student, and that is typically your middle school to middle school. But there's private schools that range, you know, especially up north. There's private schools, and if you go to a boarding school of some sort, it can range up to $42,000 a year. So. It's really ridiculous. I mean, that's basically a college tuition, but there are private schools that are outrageously, you know, they're equivalent to an Ivy League college. So it's really crazy. But you know, like I said, either or, the smaller classroom settings are much better for students than our public schools offer. So any others?
Did you go to private school?
I did go to private school more years than not, and when I went from my private school to my public school, the curriculum that they were teaching in the public school, we had already been taught in private school, you know, so we already had a grasp on it. So public school kind of, I don't want to use the word drugged down, but you know, the private school, by having the education I had going in public school, it sort of held me back from where I could have gone. But I had, you know, they would never let me go ahead. I always had to stay on track. So anyway, any other questions?
Did your children go to private school?
No, because of the cost of tuition, and I do have 3 children, we did not send our children to private school. But when we moved into the home that we moved into, we made sure we looked at the area schools to where as far as academically, who had a greater the awards that they give the schools and stuff like that, the achievements that they made. So we sort of went off that just because of the cost. The cost is so expensive. So any others?
Why do we have to pay school taxes if our kids go to private school?
We have to pay our school taxes because the government says so. You know, there's a lot of elderly people and a lot of younger people, and there are people in general who do not have children at all, but you still have to pay those school taxes. It's just something the government says. Because they offer it. You know, you don't have to send your child to a private school. You can send them to a public school. It's just your choice. So I hate to say you're penalized, but you're kind of penalized for having to do that. But our government, our school systems do their budgets on your area where they get your tax dollars to pay for the school, and that's what they are. So if you have, you know, 5% of your subdivision or of your zoning area go to a private school and they remove those tax dollars, then it's hurting the school themselves. And I know right now, or with my own children and their budget cuts, it's like they have to come home and print their homework from the internet because their paper budget's gone, and that was by December. Or when they do their Christmas parties, instead of exchanging gifts between students, it's like bring a classroom gift, you know, glue, scissors, markers, you know, whatever the case may be, because their budget has been cut so much and because they run out very quickly in the year. So, so another downfall of public school. So, anyway, any other questions? No? All right, again, I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and I appreciate your attendance.